Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to carb loading. This hopefully, well, no, it's not going to hopefully. It will uh, delve into certainly not too much of the history of carb loading, because what we want this session to be is very practical. And so everyone gains a very clear understanding of what is required in your race week leading into obviously your important event and how to do an effective carb load. So I'll do a very quick history lesson. We'll go through the race week carb loading. We'll go through actual meal days in terms of that day before the race, and then the race morning, what you should be thinking about. And then if we've got some time, we'll go into open Q&A. You know the team. So we have Dr. Alan McCubbin, who is a fellow of Sports Dietitians Australia. He's based in Melbourne, Australia. We have Elizabeth Impin, based in San Diego, and is a performance nutrition coach with masters in, I don't want to mess this up, masters in exercise physiology and nutrition. And then myself, my name's Scott, and I'm one of the co-founders and one of the performance nutrition coaches, and I'm based in Sydney, Australia. And together we are part of the Fuelin team. Okay, so carb loading. Let's just go through a very quick history lesson. So the OG, 1967, Sweden, there were some researchers that looked at the possibility of improving muscle and liver and blood glycogen stores. So the way they did this was 3 days of like exhaustive exercise, low carbohydrate fueling, absolutely horrible for athletes. And then they went into high carb fueling, which was proven to increase, as I said, liver, muscle and blood glycogen levels, but it certainly wasn't very comfortable for athletes, and it was not ideal in the race week preparation. So that initial research was then, further investigated, and as is most things with science, we see improvements. So what the progression to that was actually, we saw that light exercise could be involved, and you didn't necessarily have to do 3 days of exhaustive exercise and low carbohydrate fueling, and that they brought in more closer to 3 days of higher carb fueling. But what they were looking at was around 70% of total energy intake. And so with this progression, yes, it was more comfortable for athletes, but they weren't always seeing, unequivocal results. So there was differences in females, there were differences in males. There wasn't always the benefits in terms of changes in performance. And then we come to the current sort of carb loading strategy based on the science. And this is sort of, around higher carb days start to certainly increase T-2 days out from your race, and then at least a single day of loading T-1 from the race. This has been shown to increase muscle glycogen by an extra 90 to 100%. Okay, so that's on top of being full. It can actually sort of superload you to, I guess, if you talk about 200% above what is normal, or 100% above normal, thus giving you around 200% of muscle glycogen. Talk about low fiber for 2 to 3 days leading up. Alan highlighted this last week with the talk where we talked about you don't need to do low fiber for the entire week. You certainly, that can run the risk of you getting constipated and then being very uncomfortable in the lead up to a race. So look, 2 to 3 days of lower fiber is recommended just to reduce the chance of GI distress. And that lower fiber tends to fit very well with the carbohydrate load, because you are focusing on more or lower fiber foods with higher glycemic index, which tend to be more processed and ultra processed type foods. Okay. So some considerations to take into account. Practice. To Pat's comment before, he tried to do it, and he's been doing this for ages. It is hard. It is hard to actually get in the amount of carbohydrates that you require to provide yourself with the best chance of superloading liver, and muscle glycogen stores, okay? When to practice this? Our recommendation would be practice it around some of your big brick weekends. So if you're talking to your coach and you're like, okay, yes, you should be practicing these big bricks. And if you're not, probably have a chat with your coach, because you're practicing those big bricks from the perspective of nutrition and practicing your race fueling. It's not necessarily for the training aspect, although obviously you are getting that training aspect, but you're not keeping them separate. You're bringing together the training with the nutrition for the greater goal of improving your race performance. So those big brick weekends are an opportunity, if it is on a Saturday, to practice that carb load on a Friday. Now, this is something you can do with having a consultation with, Elizabeth, Alan, or myself, and looking at structuring your plan maybe in a little bit more personalized way to actually get the most out of this. Again, with that practice as well, you want to be practicing that race day breakfast either on the Saturday or Sunday, depending on when you are actually going to think about doing some of these big brick sort of sessions. Now, in terms of specificity, as I mentioned, that progression of the carb load was around that 70% of calories or total energy intake. Now, you don't want to be using a percentage of total energy intake as your marker for carbohydrate intake, okay? The reason for this is because if your total calorie intake is not high enough, then your total amount of carbohydrates, if it is a percentage of that, is not going to be high enough as well. And this is what's been found, and certainly with some of the research around female athletes, is that they found that when they were focused on, say, a percentage of total calories, that women weren't getting the outcomes that men were getting. And this is probably just because they weren't taking in enough carbohydrates relative to their body weight. So the minimum amount that females or males should be taking in is 8 grams per kilo of body weight. Okay, you can certainly go above 8 grams per kilo of body weight. You can certainly go above 8 grams per kilo of body weight, but you want to be aiming for a minimum of 8 grams per kilo of body weight. Now, specificity as well, when should you be carb loading? Ideally, events or certainly sessions that are lasting over 90 minutes. Now, I know some athletes are doing marathons in, half marathons, certainly in less than 90 minutes. Are you going to get a benefit from probably carb loading for a half marathon? Yes, you will. Okay. So I would put that as a caveat, and that's where I put it there. But certainly for events lasting more than 90 minutes, you will see benefit from carbohydrate loading. Events less than 90 minutes, you may not.
But on this point with the minimum 8 grams, I've had athletes in consultations before say, does even a little bit of carb loading help? Or does it have to be the full amount? So is some better than none? Or like, where does that line draw?
I mean, look, you're going to get benefits from having higher carbohydrate intake in general. But if you're talking about like looking at the research and looking to exhaustive exercise or time trial performance or, those specific parameters, then you need to eat a lot of carbohydrates to really maximize that glycogen content. Okay, that's what it comes down to. So doing a half-assed effort of a carb load, you're probably just going to eat a hell of a lot of food and then probably feel a little bit sick and maybe put on a little bit of weight without actually all the benefits. So I think if you're going to go for a carb load, do it properly and really plan it out. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you for reinforcing.
So, all right. From a gender perspective, men and women will benefit from a carbohydrate load. Okay. I'll say it again, men and women will benefit from carbohydrate load if you are specific in what you're trying to achieve. Now, I put in here about women, mid-follicular phase versus mid-luteal phase, okay? So follicular phase, lower estrogen levels, lower potential for carbohydrate storage capacity, okay? Better utilization of carbohydrates in that early follicular or that follicular phase, not even mid, but you'll use it there. So I was talking to Elizabeth about this before. Now, does it mean that you can't store carbohydrates in that follicular phase? No. What it means is your utilization of carbohydrates in that phase is better. Does that mean that you're more efficient at using carbohydrates? Probably, potentially. Again, research is not equivocal here, unequivocal here. Sorry, it is equivocal. So what it probably highlights is that if you offset that reduced ability to store carbohydrates by actually increasing far more carbohydrates, i.e. doing a correct load, then there is no difference in performance between the follicular phase and the luteal phase. Okay, I'll say it again. If you eat enough carbohydrates, then there is no difference between your hormone phases in terms of performance outcomes. Okay, you have a difference in the ability to potentially store them, but you can offset that by eating enough of them. Okay, in the luteal phase, higher estrogen levels, higher carbohydrate storage capacity. Why? Because you potentially have a slightly reduced reliance on carbohydrates and a better free fatty acid utilization. But again, you can still use carbohydrates if the intensity is sufficient enough. Okay, the take-home message for females is, and I wrote this down so I didn't mess it up, if inadequate in-session fueling, then progesterone and estrogen can impact performance as they both suppress gluconeogenesis. Okay, if you underfuel and you are looking to perform at your best, you probably will be impacted by those hormones. If you take in enough fuel, it is highly unlikely that you will be impacted. Okay, there is a wide variability in the way females respond to exercise and respond to fueling. So there can be individual variations, but if we look at the whole of the research to date, there does not seem to be a huge impact if fueling is on point. Okay, I hope that makes sense for everyone. Quite passionate. Carb loading, let's get back into it. Okay, so how do you want to think about this? You want to think about snacks. I break up breakfast, or we break up breakfast and lunch, dinner, because breakfast is, a little bit unique, although I just finished writing an article on Holly, and we looked at her carb loading day before Boulder, and breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks were all very similar. So, do what you like. If it means you can get the fuel in, it's not a culinary sort of delight the day before in terms of your carb loading. You're doing it for a purpose of getting carbs in. So from a snacks perspective, low fiber, use maltodextrin in liquid form. Certainly I'm leaning on this far more, and Alan thankfully brought this up, and I think it's been a really nice suggestion for a lot of athletes to use maltodextrin because of the lack of sweetness profile and the ability to hydrate and get in that extra 100 grams of carbs in a very easy format. I love it. A lot of athletes have been loving it. So certainly something to talk about more. You can have fruit. Don't be afraid of fruit. Fructose is very good. It helps get into the liver. So you can use fruit. Do not be afraid of fruit. Obviously, choose fruits that maybe don't have too much fiber, but most of the time fruit doesn't have too much fiber anyway. Gummies, candy, use it. If you want to use it, go for it. Okay. Breakfast, cereal. Okay. And talking pretty shitty cereals in probably how I would describe them. So you can think about Rice Krispies, Rice Bubbles, Cocoa Pops, Fruit Loops, whatever you want. They're low fiber, they're high carbohydrate, high sugar. Sugar is carbohydrates, people. Okay, you're trying to maximize this. Plus or minus, I call it protein milk. This is putting a scoop of protein into your cow's milk or plant milk, shaking it up and tipping it over so you get that extra bit of protein, which is still important even within the carb load. Again, breakfast, some fruit, white bread, bagels, pretzels, raisin toast, whatever you want. Think unhealthy foods, but with a purpose of actually getting, the carbohydrates in. Yogurt, you can use Chobani and Greek yogurts and things like that, but honestly, some of the poorer forms of yogurt, which are flavored with extra carbohydrates and sugar, can be advantageous at this point in time to reduce volume of food, but get the extra carbs in. Lunch and dinner, rice, pasta. For me personally, I think rice is easier to consume, but you will get a little bit more bang for buck from pasta. So it's just something to think about. You usually can get a little bit more pasta in terms of, you don't have to eat as much pasta to get the total amount of carbs as you do with rice, but pasta tends to leave some athletes feeling sort of full and sluggish, whereas rice doesn't. Include some protein with that. Again, using things like white bread, bagels, raisin toast, lunch and dinner as well, and some fruit. Okay, so that's sort of your framework of what you're thinking. Okay, so let's look at, there you go, there's some Fruit Loops on the left. Delicious. I don't actually eat Fruit Loops, but I hear they're very good. 65 kilo athlete. Sorry, did someone say something?
I did. I just said they are. I'm like a kids sugar cereal nut. I love Fruit Loops are fantastic. Yeah. Cinnamon Toast Crunch is great.
Captain Crunch, all that stuff.
Captain Crunch. They're all great. You can't go wrong.
Agreed.
Exactly. So I think the really interesting thing about like Cocoa Pops, so I tend to make my own Cocoa Pops if I'm doing this. So I'll add my chocolate protein milk. I use, True Protein because it's easily the best tasting. I'll tip that over rice bubbles. I think you call them Rice Krispies.
Yeah.
I'll just tip that over it. And then it's sort of a halfway house, halfway healthy Cocoa Pops. That's how I view it. It makes me feel better in my head.
I never thought to put the protein powder in until you told me into the milk. Yeah. And it's the only way that I eat cereal now, because I tell myself, I'm like, it's protein cereal.
I'm still getting 13 grams. Yeah, I'm getting 30 grams. So.
I'm like, it's a health food. And then I don't have to pay $12 a box for the quote protein cereal that tastes awful. Just awful. So yeah, it's a great hack, I guess, if you will.
Yeah. So 65 kilo athlete. Now these numbers are rough. Okay. Protein, you're aiming for around 135 grams. Fat, again, this is going to be based on what the athlete needs in totality, based around that week, total amounts of energy. Yes, you don't want to be smashing fat out of the park, but you still need some fat the day before. We're not talking huge amounts, 70 grams. This is calories, people. It's to give you some calories. Okay. Carbs here set at 530 grams, which is roughly 8.2 grams. Again, if you go over 530 grams, do not be worried. So what would this look at? Snack. Before that morning session, maybe that morning ride, shakeout the day before the race. Okay. One white piece of toast, sourdough, if you want to have, tablespoon almond butter and jam or jelly. You do your ride, you come back. 120 grams of dry weight Rice Krispies. That gives you 100 grams of carbs straight off the bat. 1 tablespoon of maple syrup, that's an extra 15 grams. If you want to have 2 tablespoons because you're feeling lucky, have 2, because that's going to give you 30 grams. Handful of berries just for a little bit of feeling a little bit better. Not a huge amount of carbs, but it adds to the flavor. 1 banana gives you around 25 grams. 200 mils of your protein milk, maybe a boiled egg, plus or minus. Okay. You go in then with the snack. This is where that maltodextrin powder, which has 0 sweetness or very low sweetness profile, you can sip on this for the next 2 hours, 500 mils an hour between breakfast and lunch. Add your electrolytes in. If you're going to do like a 1500 milligram precision hydration electrolyte load the day before, go for it. This, you can put it in. It'll make it a little bit salty. It's very delicious. You can sip on that. You're hydrating yourself. You're giving yourselves another 100 grams of maltodextrin. Lunch, 200 grams. That's going to give you 40 grams of protein, 150 grams of uncooked white rice, then cook it. That's an extra, I think it's 100 grams of carbs right there. Again, very, very basic lunch, rice and chicken. Nothing culinary about it, okay? You are eating for the purpose of getting carbs in. There's no extra ingredients. We're not even talking adding a small side salad. Shake, snack in the afternoon, shake. You might want to include 20 grams of protein, blend it up with banana, handful of berries. You could add some more maple syrup to that. If you feel like you haven't got it in, blend it up, drink it. Okay. Again, milk, cow's milk, super hydrating. Okay. The components of milk are very, very good and have been shown to be better than water in terms of hydration. Okay. So again, if you're thinking you want to be hydrated and you want to get nutrition in, do this. Snack, go for a big white bagel, couple of tablespoons honey maple syrup on it. Eat it slowly. If you're struggling with eating, dip it in water. Okay. Dip the bagel in water. Be like the hot dog eating champions. It goes down a dream. You won't even notice that you're eating the bread. Okay. Literally dunk it in water if you're struggling. Then go to dinner. It's a smaller dinner in terms of protein. So around 100 grams of protein, 100 grams of chicken. And with, again, that 150 grams of cooked rice. You're trying to eat this all probably by 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening to give yourself the best chance of going to sleep and digesting overnight, knowing that you're going to be getting up at, say, 4 in the morning. Okay. But it's really front loading that day. Get as much of it in as you can systematically at the start of the day so that as you go through into the afternoon, you're not having to sort of chase yourself and try and get that food in. Okay. We go to a heavier athlete, 10 kilos heavier. Okay. Higher protein intake, higher fat, higher carbs. So what do? You just start layering in. Again, in the morning, instead of one piece of toast, it's 2 pieces. It's 2 tablespoons of jam. Okay. Again, if you're struggling with eating this, try drinking water or dipping it in water and eating it that way. It really does make a difference. Breakfast, you could have protein pancakes. Okay. Recipes in the Fuelin app. Couple of scrambled eggs, tablespoon maple syrup, maybe 2, maybe 3. Okay. However you want. Maple syrup is wonderful. Honey you can use as well. It's wonderful because it literally is such a small amount of volume of food, but it will give you literally 1 tablespoon, 14, 15 grams of carbs. Snack, again, go for the drink. Hydrate, get your carbs in, very simple. Lunch, white fish or chicken. Look, keep it as very simple. Make sure you're comfortable with whatever you're eating. White fish is a suggestion. Again, white rice, you could be doing that. You could be doing 150 grams of pasta if that's your preference as well. Shake in the afternoon. Again, very similar. In the afternoon, you could go for a snack, something like some yogurt, cow or plant. Again, you can mix in a little bit of plant of protein if you want to, if you're struggling with hitting your protein targets. A banana chopped up on top, a couple of tablespoons of maple syrup just to add a little bit more carbs into it. And then dinner, again, pasta. If your go-to is pasta, do that. If you want to have a pizza, as long as that pizza base gives you enough carbohydrates, and again, I'd probably say that a pizza base is not going to give you 100 grams of carbs, although there are differing, I guess, pizza bases around. You can do that, keep it very plain. Something like a tomato-based sauce with a little bit of olive oil is going to hit your targets. And that's sort of what you're thinking again, front-loading it, doing it early on, and then as you get to the evening, you're not stuffing yourself. You've hit those targets fairly easily. Okay, we get into them race day breakfast. Again, practice this. This is not something that you leave until the morning of and think, oh yeah, what am I going to eat now? You've done this in training over and over again. Hopefully you've practiced it the day after practicing a carbohydrate load. Now, how much carbs do you need for the race day breakfast? It depends on what you read, but probably aiming, again, depending on the body size, somewhere between 1.5 and 3 grams per kilo of body weight. Now, if you're a really heavy athlete, you're probably going to be hitting more closer to the 1.5 to 2 grams per kilo of body weight. If you're a lighter athlete, maybe aim for the 2 to 3 grams per kilo of body weight. You know, if you're a 50 kilo athlete, I would be aiming for that 3 grams per kilo body weight. So you're aiming for 150 grams of carbs in the morning. Now, again, that's going to vary between 100 and 300 grams of carbs. Okay, body weight dependent, top ups as required. So how does the timing of this work? Probably that main meal, that big hit of carbohydrates, 2 to 3 hours before with your main meal. Now, that has to be familiar foods. Use, and actually I'll talk about the content of that in a minute. Then you can look at 60 minutes pre-swim, pre-start, topping up. So this is where we'd probably suggest either using a carbohydrate gel with your caffeine in it. So that's where you could have 100 milligrams of caffeine with a gel, something like Morton, Precision Hydration. I'm not 100% sure what else gels have 100 milligrams of caffeine, but you could be using that 60 minutes before the swim, okay? Then 10 to 15 minutes before the swim, as outlined in the Fuelin plan on race day, have another gel. That's your standard gel, 10 to 15 minutes, topped up, you're ready to go. That's going to give you a lot of carbohydrates in the morning, but again, you want to practice that and feel very comfortable with that timing, okay? Practice, practice, practice. Come into content. Familiar foods. What have you eaten day in, day out that you feel comfortable with? You certainly want to be consuming carbs, and you certainly don't want to shy away from fiber at this point in time. You can eat fiber on race day breakfast, okay? Carbohydrates and fiber are heat protective. So what that means is they will help protect the gut lining when it gets really hot. At the moment in the Northern Hemisphere, you have heat waves. Racing is going to be hot. There is going to be heat stress injuries. Worst case of heat stress injury is endotoxemia. Endotoxemia could kill you, could certainly make you very sick, okay? Carbohydrates with fiber will be heat protective of the gut lining. So what would I suggest on race day breakfast? You're about to go and exercise for probably 5 hours if it's a half, and if it's a full 10 hours minimum. You're going to need some fiber on board. You're going to need carbohydrates. You're going to need some fat. You're going to need some protein. Overnight oats, you can take it anywhere with you. You just need to package it all up before you go and have it. You would then have toast on top of that, and fruit and some yogurt. And that's how you're thinking. It's just familiar. You just need to hit that 100 to 300 grams by doing that. So it's just planning out what you're going to be eating and then doing it over and over again, so you feel very, very comfortable with it. Okay. Key takeaways. 2 days of higher carb feeding is recommended, okay? So if you look at the Fuelin app, generally T-2 will be around 6 grams, 6.5 grams per kilo body weight, very clearly laid out. The day before the race, we will clearly designate 8 grams per kilo body weight. We will structure the feeds so that you probably will have green snack, green breakfast, green snack 2, green lunch. After that, depending on your total body weight, will be the amounts of carbohydrates you require in the later afternoon and evening meals. Okay, that is purposeful. We're front loading the days in the plan so that you can pretty much hit that 8 grams per kilo body weight. Reduce fiber somewhere between 1 and 3 days before the race. There is going to be individual variability. Some athletes will swear by reducing fiber the entire week. If that's what you want to do because you really struggle with GI complaints, certainly go for that. We're just saying that you don't need to necessarily do that from word go. And what we would suggest is, again, practice it. Practice it. Practice, 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 okay? Practice your carb load, practice your race day breakfast. If you see a green meal as snack 1 on before a big session on the weekend or during the week, that's an opportunity. You see green snack 1, practice your race day breakfast. It is a great opportunity to do that. You may not eat it 1 to 3 hours before training, okay? Well, you certainly won't eat it 3 hours before training, generally during the week. On the weekend, you may or may not. But remember, even forcing that amount of total carbohydrates and fuel into you is a form of gut training, and there are benefits in that as well. Okay? With the start feeding early, that's what I'm saying. Front load the day. Green snack 1, green breakfast, green snack 2, so on. Get it in early so that when you get to 4 or 5 o'clock, it's like, oh, I just need to eat, small bowl of pasta, small bowl of rice or a small bit of pizza, and I'm actually done. I've hit my targets. One thing I haven't put in here is actually tracking. Would certainly recommend that you track what you're eating and be very specific with that, okay? Until you can actually look at your serving plates and your serving bowls and things like that to know that you're getting the amount, I would certainly recommend, and we would recommend tracking that when you're practicing it, so that when it comes to race day, you have it completely dialed in, you know the amounts that you need. And final point, nothing new on race week or race day. Okay. You're not learning a new recipe the day before. You're not eating a new dinner the night before. Plan it out. If you're having to travel, certainly, as Elizabeth highlighted in her talk, the best would be to have a kitchen in wherever you're staying and you're just cooking your own food. If you don't have that option, certainly pre-plan by looking at the restaurants that you're going to go to, look at their menus, and maybe try and recreate that at home so that you're very, very comfortable with whatever you're eating. Okay. But nothing new on race week, nothing new on race day. There are some references there, just in terms of looking at the history and then also the differences in females and how it affects with menstrual cycle. It's not just me saying it. There is actual research out there that does, support what we're saying. And then a few other ones looking at effects of 3-day carbohydrate supplementation and so on within it. So that is that. I will stop sharing and open it up. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, come on. Must have one question for me. Anyone got any questions? Does everyone manage their carb load really, really well?
Yes, Scott, the practice that you talked about leading up to the race, that's just sort of the pre-workout stuff, not sort of doing the full day carb loading, right?
No, full day carb load. Full day carb load. Let's practice it.
Okay.
Because you get to the day before, right? Like you get to your race that week and that Friday. Well, let's assume your race is on a Saturday and you're like, okay, I'm going to do my carb load now, and you've never done it. It's a shock to the system. Okay, you want to practice it. You want to know how much you got to eat. What foods you prefer, what foods you don't prefer. Like, I'm not saying you have to do it every week. I'm just saying you probably at least want to get an inkling of what it's like to do it. And to Pat's point, like, it's like, whoa, this is a lot of food.
Okay. Yeah. No, I remember the feeling.
Yeah. So Scott. So whenever I do almost the same thing before every race, because you taught me that. And so even like before Big Brick on Saturdays, I'll tend to practice it, and definitely on race the 2 days prior, it's usually bigger. And I always feel unsettled because I have changed the composition of my diet, and it just never feels good. It's never hurt me on race day, but it never feels. Is that normal?
Look, you suddenly, and it's this, as I said, this unhealthy food, isn't it? It's like when people classify foods as healthy or unhealthy, like, you've got to get out of that mindset that these foods are unhealthy or healthy. You're eating them for a purpose, and you're going to utilize all that carbohydrate and that sugar in the race. So it's not your usual eating pattern. So you eating like white bread probably will feel a little bit psychologically might be harmful as much as like
psychology. It's that I physically just feel like,
because you're not used to eating it. Like you eat, a ton of salad these days. Every meal has some sort of fibrous intake and so on. So you are literally eating a very different meal composition to what you were. And like, I hate to say it, but your blood sugar levels are probably going up fairly significantly by doing this. So your body is going to feel different, which I think, to your point, Pat, is like, even when you're used to doing it, it still can have that sensation of being uncomfortable. And it's, you just got to find that sweet spot, and practice is, I guess it's look, I give the analogy of like biking, and, you do those training sessions that feel bloody uncomfortable, but you sort of get more and more used to it the more you do it. And I think training and nutrition is just so similar in that sense. Like you just get more and more comfortable as you go, and your body just starts getting used to it and says, right, this is what I have to do.
And I can say too, I've had athletes that when they're not used to eating that much or that many carbohydrates, they get constipated. So that's a lot of times I'll say, like, let's try like the maltodextrin, let's do orange juice and apple juice, applesauce, in preparation, so that it's a little easier to start and kind of build their body up and get used to it. And that really over full feeling that you get from a lot of carbohydrates is something, if you're not familiar with it or haven't ever done it before, why the liquid stuff can be better, why cereal can feel better sometimes. Just to,
And I think on that point, Elizabeth, like, it is really important that because the volume of carbohydrates required is fairly high, you certainly want to be trying to consume, as much processed or ultra processed foods to hit you that carbohydrate amount. And because you're trying to reduce total volume, yet still get the total amount in. And that's where, like, additions of maple syrup can be game changers for a lot of people, because you're just putting it into a shake or into your milk. There's not a huge change in volume, but the consistency and the content of the food you're eating suddenly has all that extra carbohydrates in it. And that's, like, be strategic with those additional choices. You could go and eat 5 sweet potatoes, or you could just have 6 tablespoons of maple syrup. Like, I'm not saying it's just eat maple syrup either, but apple sauce, apple juice, maltodextrin, like, that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, I feel kind of dumb for not thinking of that on my own, because that would have been a lot more comfortable than stuff I've had to do. So where do you buy them? Do you just go online and grab it?
Just honestly, and look, I know this is one of those ones. It's like, do you need an NSF or an Informed Sport maltodextrin powder? Yes, I guess you could argue that it could be tainted and it could be a banned substance, but I guess in a way it's a food grade product, and it's no different from buying Gatorade from a store or anything like that. And I guess it's like, yes, it's obviously up to every athlete to know that whatever you're putting in your body is your choice, and you need to be certain of that. Maltodextrin, it's in every sports. There you go. What have you? Oh, yeah, we did talk about this actually. Phil's holding it up because you've got the food grade stuff from, say, beer making and things like that you could go and buy it for. And maybe that's a better choice to get it from, because it's not being produced in a factory or a facility which is dealing with other supplements. It's actually only being dealt with in food grade. You could buy from bulk ingredients, like I think I put up on Instagram the other day, an athlete over in Switzerland, and he had like a 5 kilo bag of maltodextrin, which was nearly as big as him. So look, up to you. Purchase it. Just know, look, try and get a source that is obviously you feel very comfortable with, knowing that, there is always a risk with any supplementation that the risk of contamination can occur. But you can certainly find maltodextrin very easily on the internet.
And I think, Scott, another trick that I've used with where you mentioned the yogurt, the traditional yogurts that everybody eats that thinks they're healthy have 30-ish grams of sugar in them. And then I'll just spoon in some jam, like red raspberry jam or something like that. And all of a sudden I'm at 60 grams of carbs, and it's just a very fruity, delicious yogurt. And it's, the density per se is this much.
I mean, literally, like, a small Yoplait. I hate to say Yoplait, but you put in some jam or some maple syrup or honey into that, and it's like this big. It's a couple of tablespoons, and you probably have 50 grams. Yep. Yogo. I don't know. Do you get yoga over there?
No, I don't know what
It's like this chocolate sort of yogurt dessert. It's delicious.
So basically, you're saying just eat like your average American for a day.
Like, literally eat like your average American. The 90-95% that are in metabolic syndrome at the moment that I was reading. Eat like that. Just go into the grocery section and look in all the kids' foods and just eat all that stuff. Like, you'll be fine.
Yeah, a fruit roll up. A fruit roll up is, you can chew on that in a couple bites. And I often, when we're talking like this, I feel like, oh God, this is the worst possible nutrition advice I could be giving. But here it's functional. It's,
Yeah.
and you're doing it, you know, maybe 3 times before your A race in terms of that carb loading. And then the actual pre-race breakfast, you're getting that in 10 times. And yeah, then the other 90% of your daily diet and that consistency, that's where those health components come in.
And look, on that point, guys, like this is guys and girls, sorry, I should say. It's really important to understand that if you're in a constant caloric surplus, then that can have negative impacts on health and health parameters. But you're doing this carbohydrate load knowing that you're about to go and do an extreme amount of exercise where you will end up in a caloric deficit despite this. Okay. So the fears that it's going to have negative health implications on you, I'm sorry, I just do not buy into that at all. Okay. You are about to go and do 5 or 10 hours of exercise. And yes, when you practice, you may not be doing that. But even with your practice, if it's a significant brick, you're probably still going to end up in very close to a caloric deficit or just thereabouts, even if you're fueling really well within that session. So we're not talking about, again, middle-aged, overweight, obese individuals taking in 100, 800 grams of sugar. We're talking about a specific population of people doing this for a purpose to actually perform at your best. Okay. That's what this is specifically about. So sort of alleviate the fears that you're doing something unhealthy, because ultimately the thing you're doing the next day is healthy. I say healthy as well, inverted commas, because triathlon's bloody hard. But you know, you don't have fears that it's going to have an adverse impact on your health. Your other 95% of what you do on a daily basis with all your fists of veggies, your protein intake, your moderate fat intake, all that sort of stuff based around the training you're doing is going to play a much bigger role in that.
Yep.
Cool. Well, that was fun. Hopefully that gave oh yeah, Phil.
Yeah, I'm gonna be doing here in September, and that should be very hot. So
Just turn your camera off, Phil, because it just keeps cutting in and out, mate. I'll just stop your video. There you go. Say it again.
doing Augusta, you're talking
Yep.
about heat. Is rain taken in?
It's just chopping in and out, Phil. Sorry, mate.
He's looking for, I think I heard him. He wants to know what he can do given that Augusta's going to be hot. Is there anything he can do specifically to help with the heat?
Yeah, I mean, Phil, there's a lot of things. Obviously, you need to understand your sweat rate, so we understand how much you're losing, how much you require in terms of intake, so you can manage your body weight loss on the run and then maximize the potential for the run off the bike. I think cooling strategies on the bike, but certainly on the run, using ice and, you know, all that sort of stuff is going to be important. Your choice of products on the bike in terms of carbohydrates and how you tolerate that, and practicing that higher amounts of carbohydrate intake in similar conditions. So you might want to be thinking about doing a lot more of your training in a hotter environment, whether that's artificial or actual environment. I think the other thing you'd want to be thinking about is heat acclimation in terms of hot water immersion or sauna protocol, certainly in 10 days leading up into that race. To try and improve your ability to cope with heat. What I'd probably recommend, mate, is, because it's quite a specific question, is probably at some point booking a consult with someone and just talking through that specifically, because it is quite a nuanced sort of situation. The day before the race, any foods to stay away from? Yeah, look, I mean, in terms of staying away from foods, again, you need to find what works with you, but certainly you're not going to be eating a lot of vegetables. You're not going to be eating a lot of fibrous foods. It's, you know, it's the opposite of what we say 95, 98% of the time. You're avoiding, you know, those types of foods that are going to fill you up and give you very low calorie intake and not really serve the purpose of what you're trying to achieve.
And I would like to say the day before, as this has happened to me, avoid food you've never tried.
Yeah.
And avoid like salad bar, buffet, like anything that could potentially be contaminated. I'm pretty sure I got food poisoning once before a race from like a salad type, make your own salad type place. So it's not necessarily just like the food types to avoid, but environments where the food quality might not be as high. Like, do not go get gas station sushi because you're on a road trip. Please.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, probably don't eat it anyway, but like, especially the night before the race, be mindful where you're or in the day before where you're selecting your food as well.
Yeah. Nothing new on race day, guys, or race week. That's what it boils down to. Take your own food. If you're traveling, take as much as you can. Just package it all up, Ziploc bags. You know, all of this can be sort of pre-planned out in advance. Cool. Well, thank you, guys. Very good group. Yeah, really enjoyable, and hopefully that gave a lot of practical information and practical insights into how to manage it. You know, obviously, you know, we can direct you as much as possible with all the, you know, the color coding around the meals, and obviously it's a lot of greens on those days, but you know, eating the food, that's your job, and planning it out. So, you know, obviously reach out to us if you've got any more questions, and enjoy. It's always nice to eat heaps of food. So, you know, enjoy it. Anyway, great to see you all. And yeah, chat soon. Oh, please at the end, leave feedback and, you know, rate the session, but also give us feedback on other things you want to hear and so on like that. Be good.
Thank you. That was great.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks. Bye.